Before I even get to my story, I want to emphasize the point of me writing this. There was more than enough blame for what happened to go around for all of us. The decision was ours to cut corners. Trusting our mother's home to a stranger was stupid. No one denies that. However, the events that unfolded as a result were 100% not our fault. We did everything society tells us to do. The police were called, and their job was to protect my sister. They failed in their job. This is on their hands. My number one aim is to impress upon you to know that it's important to fully vet any individual before allowing them to access your home. The following story is written to drive home this very important point. At the end of 2019, just before Christmas in fact, my mother passed away from a long-term illness. As I was already married and set up in a home of my own, my mother left her home to my younger sister, Emily. Emily had been renting up until this time. Her lease had just ended, so she moved in until she was sure of what she was going to do with it. She knew she had my support regardless of her decision. My wife and I threw her a surprise housewarming party for her. At the party, one of Emily's coworkers gave her a kitten as a gift. She'd been unable to have any pets in her apartment. It was love at first sight. The weeks after the party were life as usual for all of us. Emily managed to litter train the kitten, and all was going well. Just before Valentine's Day, Emily's employer notified her of a business conference she was required to attend. It was part of her job, and this would be her first trip since she had moved into the new house. Normally this would be simple, but now, with the kitten, things were a tad more complicated. My family was unable to watch the kitten because of my daughter's allergies. Kenneling was briefly considered until the price was found to be too great. Besides, she didn't like the idea of her precious little angel being locked up for 3 days. She chose to search on Craigslist for house sitters. An earlier call to a service proved too high also. She found this young girl, around 19, who claimed to be an independent house sitter. They spoke first on the phone, then met at the house so she could look around. The girl seemed kind and professional. After agreeing on an amount, the deal was set. 2 weeks later, Emily kissed her kitty goodbye and left for her trip. She checked in the first night and all sounded like it was going well. 2 days later, she returned to a nightmare. The clean, beautiful home she had left was now scattered with clothes and dirty dishes. When she confronted the girl got mad and said she wasn't a maid. Things only got worse from there. My sister was horrified to see that the litter box was full and the kitten had already began going on the floor. Certainly not the poor cat's fault, and this infuriated my sister and she refused to pay the girl. An argument broke out and the police were eventually called. They really couldn't do much other than force the girl to leave the property, but the girl was furious. She vowed she'd get back at my sister as she left. This was all said in front of the police, but they obviously didn't take the threat seriously. The officer went on their way and my sister began cleaning up the mess inside. A few days passed and Emily tried to put the experience behind her. That Friday, soon after returning from work, a man rang the doorbell and asked for her. She identified herself and the man began demanding the money owed to the young girl. My sister calmly explained the situation, but he only grew more aggressive. Although she was now terrified, she held her ground and refused. This was when the man backhanded her. She fell back and hit her head on the floor. Unfortunately, he wasn't done. He approached her and demanded the money again. My sister, who was clearly concussed, didn't answer, so he punched her unconscious. Apparently, while she was out, he entered the house and stole all the cash from her purse. By the time she had awakened, he was gone. It took her several minutes to crawl to her phone and call 911. They arrived soon after and she was rushed to the hospital. I'm happy to say that there's no long-term physical injuries, but mentally, Emily was a mess. And still is, honestly. To be frank, had I known the identity of the man and his location, I would have killed him. Fortunately, I regained my senses and agreed to leave it in the authorities' hands, despite their inability to prevent it. The responsible parties were found and arrested within a couple of days. It wasn't some great mystery after all. The man who assaulted Emily was an ex-boyfriend of the young girl. She had promised him half of the money to retrieve it. The young girl claimed she never intended anyone to be hurt, but her threat in front of witnesses cops at that, sealed her fate. She managed to get away with probation because she had no priors. Her ex, on the other hand, had a long record. He was given 3 years. But once the COVID crisis began, he was released early. The entire family was less than happy to hear of the lenient sentences, but criminals getting off easy is nothing new under the sun these days. In the months since the attack, everyone has done their most to be there for Emily. Her recovery is going well, and she seems to be responding to therapy. The lockdowns have proved a blessing for her. She's been able to heal at a much slower and calm pace. Until restrictions are lifted completely, she'd been approved to work from home. Her little furry friend has served as a priceless companion for her during this terrible time. Although some may say he was the cause of this whole awful mess, I'm glad he's been around to keep her company.